Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to welcome you all to this new style Rebecca Sieff Day. Although this has become a familiar way of communicating in these times, may I remind you that technology can sometimes let you down. And although we have a great production team supporting us, we cannot account for a loss of signal or some other technical problem beyond our control. So, in the unlikely event of a hiccup, please bear with us. Of course, I look forward to when we can all be together in one space, eating, chatting, and sharing this significant day in person, hopefully next year. However, I thank Zoom for making it possible for us to ensure that the year does not go by without our Rebecca Sieff Day. And of course, for the bonus that those who may not have been able to travel to London are actually able to join us on our screen. True, we are later in the year than we would have hoped. Unfortunately, the fallout from COVID-19 resulted in us needing an extended time period to complete all the official and financial paperwork necessary before the end of our financial year and in time for the AGM. Next year, assuming this will all be history, we will be back on track. In a normal circumstances, I would be delivering my chairperson's report for the year. However, given the complex this year has been and the time limitation of this medium, I would like to offer a brief summary today and let you have a more detailed account in the next issue of the WIZO Reporter later in the year. My activities as an ambassador of WIZO have continued either with the meetings as a distance when permitted, by phone or via Zoom. This has been a year of all hands on deck. As volunteers and professionals have pulled together to ensure that income continues to be generated despite the difficulties. Everyone is determined to fulfill our commitment to those vulnerable and disadvantaged Israeli citizens who need us now more than ever. Our WIZO groups have been amazing, doing their best in these unusual and restricted times, always willing to create opportunities and overcome the fear and rise to the challenge of technology. I think many of our members are becoming more capable Zoomers than they ever would have believed. Jewish Women's Week was, of course, the highlight of the year, an achievement beyond our wildest dreams, against all odds, but more about that later. I have felt privileged to be the chair of this organization at not only such a demanding time, but at a time of change, as together with a professional team led by Maureen, our CEO, we look to take WIZO forward, creating a professional brand, opening the doors for us to engage and educate new and wider audiences about the vital importance of our unique organization. This year, sadly, WIZO lost some true and valued friends. I would like to take a moment to think of those ladies for whom WIZO was a major part of their life, as they were a part of ours. Deirdre Bernard, Miriam Borchardt, Dina de Jong, Mildred Graf, Steffi Kester, Betty Levine, June Lewis, Helen Littlestone, Suzanne Perlman, Sharon Rosen, Ann Tanner, Shirley Waxman, Lila Weinborn. And now, let us get on with our varied, inspiring, and entertaining program. Maureen, please, would you introduce our first speaker? Thank you.
Thank you, Ronit, and good afternoon, everyone. November 25 is the date that was established by the UN in 1999 as the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. To mark the approach of this significant day in a world where violence against women in all its forms is one of the most prevalent yet relatively hidden and ignored issues of our time, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Keren Gueta to clarify for us what is abuse and identify the many faces of domestic violence. Keren is Senior Lecturer in the Department of Criminology at Bar-Ilan University and co-director of the Israeli Forum for Multidisciplinary Research on Crime Victims. Keren's main research interest is domestic abuse, both victims and offenders. Her current research projects focusing on cultural sensitivity perspectives of domestic violence. As we will hear, Dr. Goetze is very much aware and admiring of WIZO's work combating abuse of women and supporting victims. It was through her membership of a global research forum based at Oxford University that our WIZO group in Oxford connected with Keren, for which we are very grateful. And now, a warm welcome to Dr. Keren Gueta. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you all for inviting me to this special event. I'm so happy to be here and honored to be here. Let me start by sharing my presentation. So I would speak today on the many faces of domestic abuse, but before I will start my presentation, I would like to say why I'm so excited, because I know to appreciate the important WIZO work on the Israeli society as the leading organization in the field of violence and treatment. So for me, I'm so honored and excited to be here today. Before I will start, I would like to share with you a personal story of how I first knew about the life-saving work of WIZO. I grew up in a poverty neighborhood in Israel, and we had a neighbor that used to beat his wife, to abuse her for many years. We heard the screaming, and a lot of our neighbors tried to protect this woman, but unfortunately, they couldn't help her. And one day, our neighbor just disappeared. I asked my mother, where did she go? And my mother wanted to protect me because I was still young, and she told me that they went to some kind of vacation. Only a few years later, when we watched a TV article about the shelters of WIZO, my mother told me, do you remember that neighborhood that disappeared? It saved their life because she went to WIZO shelter. So this was the first time I heard about WIZO, and later on in my life, in my professional life as a clinical criminologist, I used to work in the Israeli Authority of Prisoner Rehabilitation. I started to work with abusive men and their wife, and I came to know the life-saving and professional work of WIZO. So for me, it's very exciting to be here, and I hope that you will be patient with me. So we want to know what is the impact of this domestic abuse, and especially in these terrible times that we are facing. So we know that in regular times, 1 out of every 4 women will experience domestic abuse during their lifetime. And if we take into consideration the secondary victims, meaning the children of this abused women and their parents and the neighbors, and we are talking about 1 million Israeli people that are affected by domestic violence. And nowadays, because of the COVID-19 crisis, we know that we are facing a double pandemic. We know that, and we have many indicators for that. One of the indicators is the rates of murder in Israel. We know that in this year, in 2020, 20 women were murdered by their partners in Israel. This is if we compare it to the previous year, we know that only 10 women, meaning we doubled the numbers. Another indicator that we are experiencing a domestic abuse pandemic is data regarding women's shelters that are filled to the brim, and calls to support hotlines have increased dramatically. One such hotline is men hotlines that it runs by WIZO. This is the only helpline of its kind in Israel to assist violent men in taking responsibility and getting the help they need. So we are asking ourselves, how can we handle this pandemic, this double pandemic that we are facing? How can we struggle to eliminate domestic abuse and save life? So research and my experience as one that is working with abusive men and victims, our research tells us that we first must acknowledge the many phases of domestic abuse. Because if we want to struggle this social problem, we have to know what we are facing with. So it's very important, because when we think about domestic abuse, it comes to your mind, in the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about domestic abuse, most of us thinking only about physical abuse, like pushing, hitting, or injuring women. But I know, based on my experience and based on the research in this field, that abusive men do not only hit their wife. A lot of time they are also psychologically abused her, meaning they're making the woman feel bad or think negatively about herself. And when I talk with the abused women, most of them tell me, the troubling is the psychological abuse. It's not like the hitting. I can bear this hitting, but the psychological abuse, the fear from you, the terror that I live in. Another kind of domestic abuse is economic abuse. It relates to the controlling women's resources and making her feel financially dependent. A lot of women that we are talking to them, they say, I'm the main provider. I'm working and I'm working hard, but all the control of the money is in the hands of the abusive men. And this relates to her being staying again in abusive relationship. And of course, we have the sexual abuse that a lot of women are not reporting because they are ashamed, or they are not recognize it, because they feel that if I'm married to this guy, I have to provide him with the sex. But of course, this is one of the most ongoing abuse. And there is another kind of abuse that I would like to talk to you about that most of the people do not recognize. And I know that when I'm talking even to practitioners in the field of domestic abuse, they are not recognizing or minimalizing the harm to this abuse. It's called spiritual abuse. So we have to know the many phases of domestic abuse in order to develop effective responses. And I will first introduce and define what is spiritual abuse. So spiritual abuse is any attempt to impair the woman's spiritual life or spiritual well-being. The men are doing that by belittling her spiritual worth, beliefs, or deeds. For example, a lot of the women that were spoke to in research and in interventions, they said, my husband told me that the prayers that I had no value. Or one woman told us that her husband used to say to her that God left her because she is moredet. Moredet in Hebrew, in the biblical meaning, the context of it is she's rebellious. She doesn't do what he tells her to do. Another way is preventing her from performing spiritual acts. For example, one woman told us that her husband prevent her to go to the mikveh. This is a spiritual ceremony of purity. And of course, this hurt her spiritual beliefs. Another way, another form of spiritual abuse is causing her to transgress spiritual obligation. For example, one woman told us that her husband made her eat non-kosher meals, and that we and recognize and conceptualize spiritual abuse and other forms of abuse that I will talk about, we know that we can develop effective programs, because we have to know what we are struggling against. So, for example, we know that and a lot of women, when they are introduced this concept of spiritual abuse, introducing them by social workers, this concept, if they experience it, it had a tremendous effective and therapeutic effect. For example, the women that were introduced by this concept of spiritual abuse found it very enlightening and helpful. They felt relief as for the first time their experience was grasped and verbalized. Another important issue is, so why we have to acknowledge the many phases of abuse, is that we'll develop effective responses, because in order to eliminate domestic abuse, we don't have only to take care or protect or treat women. We have many other responses in addition to treatment. So one such response is changing law and legislation. And I will give an example from my own research that we conducted among abused women, that their husband refused to give them a get. It's called a get refusal. Get, it's a bill of the divorce. So this is a situation where the partner refuses to cooperate in the issue of a get. This leaving his wife unable to remarry or to form a new relationship. And what is interesting in this kind of domestic abuse, that nobody talks about it. We know that this is a problem in Israel, but unfortunately, in contrast to other abuse, like physical abuse, the get refusal is enabled by the Israeli law, because every woman can be subjected to this kind of abuse. The Jewish laws enables this form of abuse. This is in contrast to abuse like physical abuse that is of course recognized by the law, and they have punishment. But this gett refusal is an abuse that tells us that we have to change the law. We have to make more legislation. Another issue that we have to deal with, and it relates to acknowledging the many faces of abuse, is if we want to eliminate the domestic abuse, is that we have to develop holistic and adaptive responses to domestic abuse. Because only if we acknowledge the many faces of abuse and the many forms of abuse, we can develop this holistic and adaptive domestic abuse. And I mean by that we need to address the many factors that are involved in domestic abuse. First and foremost, we need to adapt the victim needs. For example, during the COVID crisis, WIZO in Israel identified the need to establish a new shelter, because we know that women cannot go into shelter because there is a fear that they will infect the other residents. So WIZO, for the first time in the 15 years, established a new shelter, national shelter, that women can, with their children, of course, can go into this shelter and be isolated for 2 weeks, and so they cannot infect other people, but they can be protected. So we know that this kind of initiative and immediate response to the victim's needs help to save lives. Another issue that for me is a big concern is the needs of the victims that are stem from their cultural background. You remember the 20 victims of murders that were murdered this year. Only one woman in the last week was murdered 2 days ago. From 16 out of these 20 women that were murdered in Israel in the last year, 16 of them come from the Arab population. So we need to understand why these women are getting murdered, why we see so much rise in the domestic abuse against women. And one of the main factors that we think are the trigger for this rise in the domestic abuse against women, Arab Israeli women, is that there is a blessed trend in the last 10 years that more Arab Israeli women go into high schools and go into university. So this rise in the levels of education, unfortunately, created a power relation, unbalanced power relations within couples, and this threatens men and a trigger for violence. So we have to understand how to develop special measures to protect these women. Another factor that we have to address is the abuser and the children. Unfortunately, most of the service users of domestic abuse services is women. And we know that we have to take care of men because even if we protect one woman, the abusive man can go on, and if he's not going to treatment, the abusive man can go on and abuse other women. We know that this is how it happens. Even if this woman was saved, we know that other women are in danger of this man if he's not going to treatment. Another issue is the children. We have to protect the children because we know that children that are exposed to violence, they have 3 to 4 times more chances to getting involved in abusive relationship when they will be adult. So, for example, one very good program that is a preventive program of WIZO, it's called Otzma Tzira. So it identified at-risk girls and help them to empower them and to believe in themselves. So we have to take care of the children, of course. And another factors that are important that we need to address is the family of the victims, the family of the abuser, the family of origin. For example, we did a research about the mothers of abused women. We found out that these women are having experienced a very stressed relationship with their children. They feel a lot of shame and guilt that their daughter is being abused. Their maternal identity is very troubled because they feel that they are failures as mothers because their daughter was being in abusive relationship. So we need to take care for the secondary victims, the families of the victim, and also the family of the abusers. Another issue that we need to take care is society. We know that we have to change public discourse because women that are getting killed and abused by domestic abuse, it's not a women issue, it's a society issue. We need to combat it by social measures. We need to get involved more good people, people that non-abusive men that want to protect. For example, tomorrow we have a very important event that is called Men That Want to Protect Women and men that are against violence. And we need to make more communities getting involved in protecting women. 2 months ago, one woman was saved from being murdered by neighbors that heard her screaming, and they opened the door and saved their life. She was almost murdered in front of her 2 years old. So we need to get involved more community measures. And last one is the issue of the law. We know that we can use the law, make more legislations. For example, we have to find ways that women will not be subjected to get refusal. They can we have to deal with that. We know that the law must provide us with initiatives for men to go into treatment, because a lot of men are going to treatment for extrinsic motivation, like they want to avoid incarceration. And this is okay. Even if they are going from extrinsic motivation, still we can see good results in terms of stopping violence. So we need to see how we can use the law in order to eliminate domestic abuse. And it is very important, and I'm finishing here, that we will acknowledge the many faces of abuse in order to face them, in order to develop effective intervention. And we have to eliminate domestic abuse by involving all the people and all the affected communities and the affected children and abusers and victims in order to eliminate. This is a problem of all of us. It's not only a problem of the victim. And I think that WIZO, this vision of holistic and adaptive response to domestic abuse is reflected in WIZO's work. Okay. So thank you for your listening to me, and as we say in Hebrew, toda.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting and very moving in a way. Keren, we do have one question coming up, and that is from Joy Wolf, who asks, do we have evidence of an increase of violence as a result of COVID isolation?
Yes, exactly. And I saw the indication. We know that the hotlines have more percentage of callers. The hotlines for women and the shelters are filled to the brim. We need a lot another shelter because there is a lot of women that cannot get services. And it's very logical because we know that domestic abuse increases when the family is in a lockdown and the tension, the financial tensions. So we know that in Israel, and it's a worldwide trend, that the rise of domestic abuse is increased dramatically.
Thank you. Okay, so I would now like to ask Kate Schnelling to join us. Kate is chair of WIZO Oxford, and she has a few words she'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. On behalf of us all, I would like to thank Keren for an amazing and interesting and thought-provoking presentation. The many faces of domestic abuse and the experiences of many of the victims and perpetrators are quite shocking, really, and emotionally upsetting to listen and hear about. And its impact on the development and the effective programs that WIZO are helping to support in Israel, as well as the helpline to assist men who are perpetrators, is amazing. I'm very welcome. I'm so pleased that WIZO is part of that, saving lives, literally. As you're all aware, everybody, WIZO supports many victims of domestic violence and abuse, and your donations and support have been going to enable us to further life-changing programs and projects in Israel. Can you please help us some more by thinking about giving a standing order? There's a page and you can donate monthly on wizouk.org /standing order. For example, if you donate even a small amount, £5 a month, that could help in the shelters. The children have something like a warm coat. £10 will buy medication because currently in Israel they're not covered by the health system. £20 will buy books for at least 4 children in schools, and also needed in the shelters, because if you think about it, these families suddenly disappear, literally disappear with just a bag, and they don't have time to pack anything else except vital essentials. So we need to provide those when they arrive at the shelters. They need toiletries, toys and games for the children, and many other things like medication and even food to help them. So please, 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 I beg you, think about just donating a small amount monthly. As the Talmud says, whoever saves one life saves the world. And I know that WIZO is saving many lives and helping a new future for many, many children and families. We're now going to have a 10-minute comfort break, and then we will meet our next speakers, who I'm really excited to see again because I met them in Israel last year. The granddaughters of Rebecca Sieff, Granny Becky as they knew her. So we'll see you soon. Thank you.